We in the present have done, I think, a grave injustice to Washington. His birthday on February 22nd used to be a major holiday in the United States, with Washington being the focus of that day. Now it's been collapsed, as you know, into President's Day, and it's just as if his birthday is just along with all the other presidents, even if those other presidents include Lincoln, don't really count. His distinctiveness has been lost. His awesome superiority has been lost. His fellow citizens would have been appalled at what we've done. Today, we tend to lump Washington in with all the other half-dozen founders who helped build the nation. But they never did. They always thought that he stood head and shoulders, both literally and figuratively, over them. And they always knew that he was superior to them. There was never any equality between Jefferson, Franklin, and Madison, and Adams, and Washington. Washington, even John Adams, who was very jealous of Washington, had to admit that he was the superior man. In other words, Washington was a classical hero. In fact, he may be the only classical hero we've ever had in our entire history. He was a great man, and he knew it. He was well aware of his reputation and his fame earned as Commander-in-Chief of the American Revolutionary Forces. That awareness of his heroic stature was crucial to him. It affected nearly everything he did for the rest of his life. Now, he was a thoroughly 18th century figure. Like Samuel Adams, he was one of Plutarch's men. And like Adams, he quickly became an anachronism. He belonged to a pre-democratic, a pre-egalitarian age of the 18th century, to a world, I think, very different from the world that would follow. No wonder, then, he seems so remote, so distant from us. He really is. He belonged to a world we've lost, and we were losing even in his own lifetime. Now, in many respects, Washington was a very unlikely hero. To be sure, he had all the physical attributes of a classical hero. He was very tall by contemporary standards, and he was heavily built and a superb athlete. Physically, he had what both men and women admired. He was both a splendid horseman at a time when that skill really mattered, and he was at the same time an extraordinarily graceful dancer. And naturally, he loved both horseback riding and dancing. He always moved with dignity, and he just looked the leader. Yet those who knew him well and talked with him were often disappointed. He never seemed to have very much to say. He was most certainly not what we would today call an intellectual. We cannot imagine him expressing his views of the uses and abuses of grief in the world in the way that Jefferson and John Adams did in their correspondence at the end of their lives. Adams was especially contemptuous of Washington's intellectual abilities. It was certain, said Adams, that Washington was not a scholar, that he was too illiterate, unlearned, unread for his station and reputation is equally past dispute. Now, Adams's judgment, I think, is much too harsh. Great men in the 18th century did not have to be scholars or intellectuals. But there's no doubt that Washington was not as learned as Jefferson or Adams. He had not attended college as they had, but as an autodidact, he had trained himself. He had read widely, and he was much more learned than I think historians have generally assumed. Still, there's no doubt that he was very, very ill at ease in abstract discussions. Even Jefferson, who was usually generous in his estimates of friends, believed that Washington's colloquial talents were not above mediocrity. He had neither copiousness of ideas nor fluency of words. Consequently, Washington was often very diffident in company. Some even called it shyness. But whatever the source, this reticence was certainly not the usual characteristic of a great man. His modesty is astonishing, particularly to a Frenchman, noted Brissot de Warville. He speaks of the American War as if he had not been its leader. This modesty, I think, only added to his gravity, his severity. Most people say too much, one friend recalled. Washington never fell into this common error. He had, said John Adams, the gift of silence. And as David Fisher pointed out last night, he was a great listener.